Hey folks, welcome back for another build video where we are looking at a Hunter's Fury build utilizing the new Vigil high-end backpack and the Centurion's Scabbard exotic holster. Also, for the first time on the build video series, we're going to be talking about the mods here. Today we're going to be sticking to the passive modifiers, but look forward to future videos where we will dive into both active and passive modifiers, talking about which ones would be good for particular builds. And while we're still developing a format going forward with these modifications in the game, you can look forward to us talking about the specific modifiers that we would have attached to the build that we're presenting, and sometimes some potential alternate choices where that makes sense. But let's not get too far ahead of ourselves. On this one, we've gone with the Gunner Specialization, primarily for the Incessant talent, which grants 10% armor on kill, and the Barrage talent, which increases your rate of fire by 5% on kill for 5 seconds. For our primary weapon, we've gone with the Dark Winter high-end submachine gun, which has the perfect killer talent. Killing an enemy with a critical hit grants plus 90% critical hit damage for 10 seconds. And I will make note here that is a fairly recent buff to the killer talent. You now get 90% and 70% for the perfect and normal versions of this talent. And then for our secondary weapon, we've gone with the Scorpio exotic shotgun, which sports the Septic Shock talent. Shooting a target applies stacks of venom, which last for 10 seconds. Increasing stacks add more severe debuffs to the target. At 2 stacks, you get poison, 4 stacks disorient, 6 stacks shock, and after 9 stacks, the target takes additional 20% damage from all sources, and the stacks no longer increase. Most of that is information you will probably already be aware of, but I will make note again here. Even with the nerf to the Septic Shock talent, for veteran players, you'll know those stacks used to apply at lower numbers. Now, of course, it requires more than a full magazine, which standard on the Scorpio is 6 shots, as you see there. That is because the Impatient passive modifier is doing some funny stuff, but we'll get into that towards the end of this video. I don't want to go too far down the rabbit hole, but just know that even with the nerf to the Septic Shock talent, the Scorpio shotgun is still very usable, especially when you pair it with the Centurion's Scabbard. For Sidearm, we've gone with the Orbit. It's a pretty standard addition to any critical hit build for the perfect finisher talent. Swapping from this weapon within 10 seconds of killing an enemy grants plus 35% critical hit chance and plus 40% critical hit damage for 15 seconds. Primarily, the critical hit damage is going to be the benefit there, but both can be beneficial if you build into them and you enjoy using your sidearm to get kills. Realistically, though, for this build, you're going to be swapping between your primary and secondary weapon, and this sidearm is just a nice bonus. If you can get a kill with it and then swap back to either of those weapons, you get some additional critical hit damage to make use of. For our mask, we have our first of 4 pieces of Hunter's Fury gear. We'll go ahead and run through all of those piece bonuses right now so we can save ourselves some time and talk more in depth about the unique pieces on this build. At 2 pieces of Hunter's Fury, you get plus 15% shotgun damage and plus 15% SMG damage. Both of those are utilized by our primary and secondary weapons. At 3 pieces, you get plus 20% armor on kill, which does stack with the 10% from the Incessant talent that you get from the Gunner Specialization. And then you also get plus 50% health on kill, which is particularly beneficial if you're out of armor and really low on health, or if you're suffering from poison for some reason. And then, of course, at 4 pieces, you get the Apex Predator talent. Enemies within 15 meters receive a debuff, amplifying your weapon damage against them by 20%, and killing a debuffed enemy with your weapon disorients other enemies within 5 meters and amplifies weapon damage by 5% for 10 seconds, which stacks up to 5 times. And then, of course, this is a crit hit build, so we've gone with the natural weapon damage core there, and then critical hit damage in our secondary attribute slot, and that is consistent for all of the Hunter's Fury pieces across this build. We have critical hit damage rolled in the secondary attribute slot, and critical hit chance in our mod slot. As always with any critical hit build, your specific attributes and mods are going to depend on your specific math based on this simple formula that I'm going to flash on screen here. So go ahead and run that with your numbers and just make sure you're getting the optimal amount of damage for the attributes and mod numbers that you have. So unsurprisingly, we're using Hunter's Fury here. It's going to be a short range build, but this is also going to be a weapon swapping build. For backpack, we have the new Vigil, which is the named backpack from the new Legatus SPA brand set. And very helpfully, you can see there the first brand bonus on this set is plus 30% swap speed. Not ordinarily something we worry about on most builds, but for this one where we are constantly swapping between our primary and secondary weapons, it is really beneficial to have some additional swap speed there. And of course, as we said with the mask, this is a critical hit build, so we have critical hit chance and critical hit damage in our secondary attribute slots, and then we have critical hit chance here in the mod slot. And then here we have the perfect versatile talent, which amplifies total weapon damage by 10 seconds when swapping between your primary and secondary weapon if they are different, which of course they are on this build. That gets you plus 45% to enemies within 15 meters for shotguns and SMGs. We'll go ahead and skip 2 paragraphs there because they're not relevant for this build. We're not using rifles, marksman rifles, LMGs, or assault rifles. But I will make note of that last paragraph. This talent is active at most once per 5 seconds per weapon type. So again, you amplify total weapon damage for 10 seconds, and you can activate that at most once per 5 seconds per weapon type. And on this build specifically, you get an additional 45% weapon damage to enemies within 15 meters. So even more than you ordinarily would on a Hunter's Fury build, it is imperative that you are engaging enemies within 15 meters because of how much extra damage you can do to enemies that are up close and personal with you between the perfect versatile, Hunter's Fury, and passive modifiers that we'll get to at the end of this build. For chest, we have our second piece of Hunter's Fury, and we've gone with critical hit damage in the secondary attribute slot, and then actually critical hit damage again in the mod slot here. Again, that is because of our particular math on our attributes and our mods. Follow the formula on screen, and you can do your own just as easily. Again, just make sure you're getting the highest number possible to modify your damage output. With the Hunter's Fury chest piece, we also get the Endless Hunger talent, which increases the duration of Apex Predator stacks from 10 seconds to 30 seconds. So obviously with this build where we have 2 unique pieces, one being the backpack, the other being the holster, we were kind of forced into using the chest piece here, but I still wanted to make note of it because it is useful for extending that duration and allowing you to run between encounters and keep those stacks potentially more often than you otherwise would. I'll also make note that this is a decent countdown build because with that 30-second clock as opposed to the ordinary 10, you do normally have enough time to get between enemies and keep those Apex Predator stacks active. For our gloves, we have our third piece of Hunter's Fury, unlocking that 3-piece bonus, giving us a total of plus 30% armor on kill with this build, which is really nice to have. It helps keep you upright. As you'll see in the video later, I do get down in terms of armor levels, but every kill you get gives you 30% armor, which is really beneficial for this build where you are so close to your enemies and taking so much fire from them. And here we have the new Centurion's Scabbard exotic holster. We talked about it at the top of the video, but let's get into it. It comes with the core attribute of weapon damage and secondary attributes of weapon handling and critical hit chance. While in theory it might be nice to have some more critical hit damage in that secondary attribute, I will take this moment to shout out weapon handling as an underappreciated attribute. Weapon handling is one of the roll-up stats in this game, so 1% weapon handling is equal to 1% stability, 1% accuracy, 1% reload speed, and critically for this build, 1% weapon swap speed. So ideally we will optimize this down the line and get that weapon handling maxed out. But for now, just know that the weapon handling stat is not wasted on this build. It's really nice to have, as it'll help increase your weapon swap speed and your reload time, and then also help you keep all of your bullets on target with that accuracy and stability benefit. But of course, I'm burying the lead here. The Centurion's Scabbard comes with the counter talent. Swapping weapons will give the following groups of bonuses one by one in order. 1 is plus 20% rate of fire and plus 20% weapon damage, and then 2 is plus 50% magazine size and plus 50% reload speed. The bonuses remain active for 12 seconds or until the next weapon swap, and swapping to your sidearm will not trigger the next group of bonuses. So that is a lot to take in, but the main thing there is one of your weapons will have plus 20% rate of fire and plus 20% weapon damage, and the other will have a plus 50% magazine size and plus 50% reload speed. Both of those are active on those weapons independently for 12 seconds when you swap to them. So the name of the game here between the perfect versatile talent and the counter talent is going to be swapping between your weapons during an encounter to keep all of those buffs active. In fact, most of the time when I go down with this build, it's because I'm not paying enough attention to those timers and I'm not swapping between them fast enough. And while you'll probably see both elements of this talent active on the Dark Winter and the Scorpio, because I was still figuring it out while getting some of the recording for this, my recommendation for this build is to put the plus 20% rate of fire and plus 20% weapon damage onto your Dark Winter, and then the plus 50% magazine size and plus 50% reload speed onto the Scorpio. Because as we were talking about when we were going over our secondary weapon choice, an additional 50% magazine size will get you over that 9 stack peak, meaning that you can get all of the elements of Septic Shock active in a single mag for the Scorpio, which I think is really beneficial. On top of that, you'll see in the video when you swap to the weapon that has that second bonus active, it'll automatically reload your weapon. So with this build, again, your primary is the Dark Winter. That's what you're taking down enemies with. But when you come up against something difficult or something that needs to be finished off, or just something that needs to be stun locked, you can swap to your secondary, swap to your Scorpio, have 150% of the normal mag size to use, and use it to help take down an enemy or crowd control a situation, whichever you need. And then last but not least, for our Kneepads, we have our fourth and final piece of Hunter's Fury, unlocking that Apex Predator talent, which again, just to reiterate, we were talking about it on our backpack, but because of the perfect versatile talent and the Apex Predator talent, engaging enemies within 15 meters is going to be really crucial because it gives you an extra 45% weapon damage with the perfect versatile talent, and it makes sure they're all receiving a debuff with the Apex Predator talent. For skills here, you can go a number of different routes. We've gone with the Reviver Hive and the Banshee Pulse, which is a unique skill from the Gunner Specialization. The Reviver Hive here could be replaced with the Striker Ballistic Shield if you prefer. With this build, I did find myself going down more often than I usually do, so the Reviver Hive is just a nice way to make sure you can get yourself back up if you're running solo, or not have to rely on a teammate to get you up if you're running in a group. But obviously this one is much more preferential. The Banshee Pulse skill is the one I will highlight here because I do think it's really nice to use, not least of all because when you come upon a group of enemies, as you'll see later in the video, you can apply Disorient to anyone that you can catch within that cone, and then you can swap between your weapons to activate Perfect Versatile and the counter talent on your holster, start the clock on both of those, and take down just swaths of enemies with all of that increased damage and debuff. But with that, let's get into our modifiers. For anyone who is unaware, this is all new gameplay mechanics as of Title Update 22, which came out in late 2024 for those of you catching this video in the future. All that is to say, we are still figuring this out, trying to figure out how we want to format videos with this. If you have any thoughts, please put them in the comments. But here goes nothing. Let's start with our active modifier, which again, as you can see, we have not unlocked those for use yet. First, I want to talk a little bit about active modifiers. As you can see there, we still have not unlocked those. So in the gameplay video later on, none of these are active, but I do want to take a quick second to sort of run through these very briefly. As you'll see, the cooldown on all of them is 50 seconds. They apply very different bonuses based on how they're structured. But the long and short of it is, for this build, without being able to fully test it, because obviously we haven't unlocked it, I would recommend the all-out active modifier for this build, which is, of course, when activated, you will have 10 seconds to eliminate an enemy in any range zone. In this case, it's going to be the close range. After that, the close range will now count for the full range spectrum, but that effect slowly decreases. For every 5% it decreases, you receive 5% increased weapon damage. That last sentence there is why I would recommend this active modifier for this build, because effectively over time you're going to be increasing your weapon damage as you're going through. It's all to say that it's a nice way to get some additional weapon damage out of this build if you do have this active modifier unlocked. But that being said, again, a reminder, this is not unlocked yet, so in the gameplay video later, that's not even active. All we have are the passive modifiers here down below. Let's get into these. So as we spoke, it's a Hunter's Fury build. It's a perfect versatile build, both of which rely on engaging enemies at close range. So obviously the short range passive modifiers are the ones we're going to be focused on here. Bear with us while we're still playing around with this format. For this video, we're actually going to recommend 2 different configurations of modifiers. The first one is all 3 short range modifiers: drawback, impatient, and liability. The second is still going to have drawback and liability, but swapping out impatient for bait and switch. Now the main reason to swap out impatient and go with the second configuration is if you don't like the decrease in mag size that the impatient modifier carries. I do want to point out here that when you pair the Centurion's Scabbard counter talent with the impatient passive modifier, one of your weapons can actually maintain its standard mag size thanks to the plus 50% mag size from counter, neutralizing the minus 50% mag size from impatient. So if you do go with this configuration of passive modifiers, I would actually recommend putting the counter talent's increase in rate of fire and increased mag size on the Dark Winter, and then just committing to a very small mag size on your Scorpio, but then you do get the weapon damage buff on your shotgun, which, as you'll see in the videos coming up, does make it a very effective finishing weapon, but it does make it more difficult to get through the full range of Septic Shock talent effects. With all that being said, let's run through all 4 of these options. For drawback, weapon handling is increased by 50% of your headshot damage while there are enemies within short range, which for this build, where you're intentionally trying to close the distance between enemies, you're very often going to have enemies in short range. So you can kind of think of this as a base 35% weapon handling increase, because it is 50% of your headshot damage, and even though we haven't built into headshot damage on this build, you do have a base stat of 70% headshot damage, assuming your watch is maxed out. So that's a great passive modifier to run on any short range build, particularly this one, where you're taking advantage of that weapon handling's increase to your weapon swap speed. The impatient talent, we've already gone through it. Increase rate of fire and actually decrease your reload time there. I think they wrote that kind of poorly, but you have an increased rate of fire and the time it takes to reload is decreased by 30%, but both of those come at a standard mag size decrease of 50%. So in this case, and in the video later, you'll see for the most part, the Scorpio shotgun has a really small mag size, but your benefit there is you get massive rate of fire and massive reload time on both the Scorpio and the Dark Winter. For liability, you deal 30% more damage to armored enemies within short range, but the damage received from armored targets is increased by 15%. So this is kind of a baby version of the glass cannon talent, obviously nowhere near as punishing, but it's a similar style. You get increased damage at the cost of taking increased damage, in this case from armored targets in particular. And again here, if you don't want to go with the impatient modifier, I would recommend the bait and switch multi-zone passive modifier. Increases your hazard protection by 12% for each enemy in short and medium range for 5 seconds, and the buff duration is refreshed for each new enemy entering any of these ranges. So really what I would recommend doing is running both impatient and bait and switch, swapping between them, seeing which one you prefer. Obviously the rate of fire increase for impatient is really nice, but if you find yourself going down or really too squishy, the bait and switch is a great passive modifier to increase your hazard protection for this season and probably moving forward. Not that I'm trying to predict the future. Hazard protection is probably going to be really nice to have if they're going to keep giving special ammo to enemies, because it can help negate the effects of that special ammo type. And then last here, I do want to talk to these global and hostile modifiers, just because they do impact the gameplay that you're going to see in just a second. For this recording, the point blank global modifier was active. And so for the short range enemies we are engaging, you do get 1.2x the damage. And then here we have the hostile modifiers. Less important for the build, but just know in the gameplay that you see, there is the Requital modifier, Master of None, Terrify, and the Stellite Coating. I'm not going to go in depth on those unless you guys really want me to. We'll go ahead and put those all up on screen. If you want to read this while I'm rambling, feel free. But otherwise, just know that in the gameplay video, these are the hostile modifiers active. But with that, let's take you back to the centerpiece of this build, the Centurion's Scabbard paired with the new Vigil named backpack, which sports the perfect versatile talent, both of which are combined with the Hunter's Fury gear set to make this just a run and gun, short range build to take down all of your enemies with a lot of weapon damage. So take this one out, give it a try, let us know what you think of it in the comments below. Again, let me know what your thoughts and feelings are with all of the global modifiers and the major changes that came with Title Update 22. Really curious to hear your feedback, both on the game at large and also what you think of us including the modifiers in our build videos. Let us know if you want more of that, less of that, anything in between. As always, like this video if you liked it, subscribe if you want to see more stuff like this, and please feel free to share the video with your friends, tell them about the channel so you can continue to help us grow and make videos like this. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you in the next one.
Detected. Detecting additional hostile contacts. Vital signs critical. Incoming hostiles detected. Immediate medical assistance needed.
Bushwhack these motherfuckers!
Serious trauma detected. Immediate medical assistance needed. High threat enemy patrol detected.
We're being flanked! Get back! Secure the area!
Serious trauma detected. Detecting additional hostile contacts.